I'm JR Butler, co-founder and CEO of The Shift Group, and you're listening to Merchants of Change. This is a podcast about transferring the skills and behaviors we acquire as athletes and military veterans into becoming a professional salesperson. Each week, we'll introduce you to a top performer who will help us understand how they became professional merchants of change. What's up, kid? Today on the show, we've got Vince Nistico. Vince, how you doing?
Doing great, JR. Thanks so much for having me.
No, thank you for being on the show. Just so you know, for new listeners, Merchants of Change is a show that's really built for new salespeople, people who are thinking about, considering a career shift into sales. And our mission at Shift Group is we help elite athletes and military veterans become elite sales professionals. All of our guests are typically former athletes or veterans who've kind of, had success and spent some time in sales careers and in business. And for structure, we like to start with some sports background, talk about your transition to sales, and then we really like to finish with some nuggets for the listeners. Sound like a plan?
Sounds great. Let's do it.
I love it. All right, great. So this is a very broad question we start with. I want to know, when I ask you, like, what are some of your favorite memories of playing football? What comes to your brain right away?
Sure. I think this was about 7-8 years ago now, but do we all remember it was during March Madness? It was the Boston College kid. He's up on the podium and the interviewer asks, what is he going to miss the most? And he chokes up and he says, having lunch with the guys, or, something to that effect is, that really resonated. Is, of course, there are the huge wins. My junior year at Williams, we went undefeated and, beating Trinity, a team that had our number the past couple of years is, very, very memorable. Or beating Amherst on their field, to seal the deal, of course, are things that I'll never forget. But, if I write down my top 10 memories of Williams football, most of them are either going to come, in the dining hall, or, maybe watching film with the guys, or, a trip to Tufts, or, whatever it may be. It's, you go through, you go through so many obstacles and tribulations with your teammates, and, people that that are equally as bought in as you are going through the same things. Is that, that camaraderie itself is what's really special. Maybe, not even so much the wins and losses.
I couldn't agree more, man. That is hands down the most common answer we get. Everybody misses the locker room, the times after practice, dining hall, all the things you said. We actually had a Trinity alum on here, Mike Palladino, a fellow Turbo alumni too.
Oh, yep. I wonder, the name doesn't sound familiar. I'm not sure if our.
I think he might be a little bit older than you.
Okay.
But I'm definitely going to clip this out and send it to him. Now, looking back at those teammates, right? The teammates you had at Williams. When you think of some of your favorite teammates, what are some common characteristics that the best folks that you played with all have in common?
I think actually, since entering the working world of just how special it is when you find colleagues and coworkers that are bought in the same way that you are into a common goal and a mission. I think in, reflecting on which of my teammates, stick out to me the most, it's ones that, that I know that are in the trenches there with me. I did play in the offensive line, so not even so much that, don't need to be a lineman, so to speak, right? But, who are the guys in the weight room or out on the track that are working hard, just as hard as all of us? As, those are the ones that are, that always stick out and are memorable to me, and, still, lifelong friends for sure.
How do you think your teammates from Williams would describe the type of teammate you were?
So my father was a high school football coach. We played against one another more so than, him ever coaching me, outside of in the backyard. So I think probably the first thing that would come, that my teammates would say is I very much fit the coach on the field type. Is it was very rare that, anybody knew, maybe scheme or what we were looking to accomplish, from an X's and O's perspective, maybe better than I did. But I definitely had a little bit of a leg up of, can remember from as young as I can, maybe remember watching things on TV of, sitting next to my dad as he diagnosed film of that. It's something that's it's always come natural, I think, because of that background and experience.
Dude, that's awesome. So my dad was a high school hockey coach. Yeah. So like I can relate to your childhood in a really unique way, but you didn't play for him. You played against him.
Played against him. We were 2-2 versus one another. But we whooped up on him pretty badly. My senior year, we won 41-7 that year, which was pretty satisfying.
Oh man. Well, I hope you guys didn't play on Thanksgiving. It wasn't like a huge rivalry, was it?
It was a rivalry. It wasn't our Thanksgiving Day game. It was a little bit earlier in the season. But definitely one of the ones that I would have had circled on my calendar, anyway, even if, Dad wasn't on the other sideline.
That is awesome. Does he still coach or did he retire?
As you could probably, relate to your own father, JR, is like my dad can't stop coaching. He's just a coach. So, he was coaching girls softball for a little while, girls lacrosse. He just can't stop coaching. It's just who he is. But he's hung up the football whistle. Yeah.
So and I don't know your dad, but I know my dad. So my dad retired from high school hockey a while ago, and it was good timing. Is like, I don't know if he could get away with some of the stuff he used to do anymore. But
we may need to clip this part out. But my dad says he doesn't. That's the hardest challenge today is that there's as he would describe it, a sense of entitlement.
Yes,
that maybe didn't exist before.
Totally.
That just makes it extremely, extremely challenging. Is that and actually, I think he puts it very well of that there's this inherent like sacrifice that you need to understand as an athlete. And that's whether it's an individual sport or a team sport. And he says that, it's that element of sacrifice, being willing to give up something from yourself for the greater good that's missing.
Yeah. And like, not for nothing. It's not the kids it's not the kids' fault that they're entitled. That's not where it comes from, right?
Absolutely not.
When my dad retired, so in Massachusetts, high school hockey starts the Monday after Thanksgiving because after football season, literally the first Tuesday after Thanksgiving that my dad wasn't coaching, my mom literally sat him down and was like, "You need to get the hell out of the get the hell out of the house." So like he ended up, now he coaches junior hockey. He's been coaching junior hockey for 10 years because my mom couldn't deal with him.
You got to go do something. Yeah, no,
100%. Once a coach, always a coach.
Wonder when you see some guys in NFL. I'm sure it happens in the NHL as well. Of that they retire, but then the retirement only lasts about half the season, and you have to think of how much of it is like, oh shit, I'm gonna have to stay at home now, type of thing.
Totally. Like you got a head coach becoming offensive coordinator just because they don't want to go home. Yeah. So let's kind of move into the transition. So you're on the field, last game of college career at probably at Amherst.
Yeah.
And I bet you're just like secretly dreaming of putting on a headset, getting your Salesforce.com login credentials, right? Like, so obviously that's a joke, but like, tell me, you went to an unbelievable college. What happened that kind of landed you in sales? And were there other careers that you explored in the process?
Absolutely. And I'm sure, Jay, similar to Holy Cross, of that you go to places like Williams or Holy Cross and there's what you should be doing, right? Whether that's, the consulting route or, investment banking or, finance in any capacity. And I think that was the expectation that I had sort of myself, but not for any, good reason, of course. And, with that had struck out with a lot of the, bigger name consultancies or, and investment banks. Ironically, I was hired by an Amherst golfer, who, their recruiting strategy, very similar to Shift Group, was to reach out to NESCAC ADs, find out who the seniors were that were still on the job market. And, that was essentially their candidate list. And that was with a private equity firm in Boston called HIG Capital.
Oh, yeah.
And unlike, maybe more of the traditional investment banking or private equity roles out of school, a little bit less connected with the financial modeling, and valuation side of things, but more of sourcing. So, I was reaching out to owners of, businesses to gauge their interest of, bringing on an investment partner.
Yeah.
With that is you, of course, still get exposure to a lot of the, the financial components of things. I think the strongest testament that I could give to that experience is that I would go and do it again, just because I think it was so foundational in the way that I think about, maybe business or, trying to align or understand, strategic initiatives of any of my prospects. I think it was a great experience. I just didn't quite fall in love with it enough, to really invest and commit to, going the business school route and things like that.
Yeah. I mean, you're right. That sourcing job is, you're banging the phones, you're getting meetings and you're calling executives and owners. So now that I didn't know that, now that I know that, I remember your early days at Turbo being very strategic and enterprise driven. And now that makes a lot of sense to me. Let's talk a little bit. So I want to ask you some questions about the early days of your selling career. What were some of the highlights? What were some of the lowlights, some of the challenges?
As far as highlights, I think of, the bet and investment that Chris Reisig, took on me and helped, bringing me and Justin Kudacheri to help start that global accounts team.
Yep.
It was, I'm very grateful and fortunate for that. It, gave me exposure and an opportunity to make a big impact at, at VM Turbo. It didn't, end, maybe as anybody had wanted, but to be able to get exposure and sit in the same room as, IBM or Microsoft executives, it was an awesome, awesome learning experience. Everybody at VM Turbo was learning on the fly. We were changing and fixing the engine as we were driving down the highway type of thing. But I think it really helped, I think, build my confidence that it was something that I could do. And I think more so than anything, it helped me realize why I liked selling, which I think is important, for anybody that's looking to get into sales, to maybe understand of what is it about selling that, that maybe invigorates you or excites you. Because, I think it's very, common of thinking of sales of the, sort of the stereotypical tropes that, that everybody does. And I certainly, myself, I was no different in thinking that way. But I think, having done what we did with those MSPs at VM Turbo, it really made me realize what I actually liked about it was how systematic and like process driven it all could be. Of that, okay, we have to, start here and climb up the chain, go laterally this way. You sort of start to see this puzzle, forming. And that was the thing that got me invigorated because it allowed me to still be strategic, and use my critical thinking skills, which is, I would certainly consider myself maybe more of the silent assassin sales type opposed to the, let's go and rub elbows and, maybe, be more of your friend. Again, I'm just drawing extremes here, but it allowed me to apply, my critical thinking skills and, ways that I've found success being very process driven.
Totally. It's I remember that too, by the way, because Justin was a rep on my team, and Chris approached me and kind of told me. And the thing about Chris Reisig is, when you look back at what he was doing, he was right. You know what I mean? He was just a little earlier than everybody else was ready for, but ultimately he was on the right track. And
of course, I do not take a single ounce of credit for it, but I would be lying if I said it wasn't satisfying to see that IBM bought you guys.
I agree. I agree 100%. Unfortunately, the right people have told Chris, "Hey, you were right. I'm sorry about what happened." Now, tell me a little bit. So you're. I want to know how you ended up at VM Turbo to begin with. You were at HIG, and then how did Turbo get on your radar?
So I think VM Turbo was on the 7th floor of 500 Boylston.
Yes,
I was 2 floors above you guys at HIG. So it was the role there that I was in. It was, pretty well established that it was a 2, maybe 3-year role. And then you sort of, branch out from there. So, had looked back of, maybe going into consulting, continuing down the finance path. But, and Boston still has this, a very bustling tech scene. And so, decided to throw my hat in the ring and interview for some introductory, BDR type roles. And, you go in the elevator and you see these VM Turbo guys and you see like the type of energy that, is radiating off of you.
Yeah.
It was hard to not be attracted to that, and then you get off on off the elevator and you walk through those doors and you see, you see everybody working, the way that they are, having the dials and the demos set and the deals closed, on the boards there. It's, you're, especially as an athlete, are you one that's running into the fire or running away from it? And I'm someone who runs towards it. And it was almost like a fly to to one of those lights in the backyard. I couldn't stay away.
It was an awesome culture for the right people. That's for sure. And thinking of that, right? I think it was, a lot of people really started their sales career there that have gone on to a ton of success. And I think a lot of it has to do with a lot of the characteristics about that company. Now, if a Williams football player called you up and said, hey, I'm thinking of going into sales. Mm-hmm. What's like your coaching to that person? What kind of questions are you going to ask them to help them decide if sales is the right path for them?
Sure. And this is something, JR, that you and I think, feel very similarly about in reading some of your LinkedIn posts, of that whether you're in sales or any other role, you're selling. I always joke with my friends that life is one big sales call, and the quicker that you identify it, the better you'll be. So I think that I would be very encouraging of that, whether it is, sales and you're, individual contributor, you're going to be selling in whatever role that you are. You could be, think about maybe something that is the least sale or at least connected with sales, of like being a doctor. You're selling your expertise of, for your diagnoses and maybe treatment plans, is that you're always selling regardless of the role that you're in. And again, couldn't agree more with maybe some of your perspectives on that. But I think that and I had mentioned it, maybe before, as far as, are you the type of person that runs towards the fire or away from it? Is I think that I would, implore that person to really have a sit down with themselves and ask which one of those people that you are.
Yep.
Is that you have to deal with rejection far, far more than you're getting, affirmation in sales. There is a very, very high degree of accountability, and there is a scoreboard. And I think, in framing it that way, there's people that would maybe be a little bit scared off from it, or people who would have that perpetual chip on their shoulder of like, what, you're trying to tell me that I can't do it. And there's nothing wrong being either of those people, but I feel like that's a sort of one of those gut check maybe moments, or things that I would really have that person consider for themselves.
Yeah. Two comments. The first part about like everybody sells. The data tells us that on the lowest end in any profession, you spend 40% of your time convincing, motivating, and persuading people to take action. That's sales, right? So that's the lowest end, 40%. On the higher end, you're an attorney, you're a doctor, those type HR, those types of roles are more like 80, 90%. You just don't have a quota and there's no scoreboard. Right. But trust me, you're selling, right?
Absolutely.
So I love that you mentioned that. And then I love how you're thinking about like you got to be comfortable betting on yourself. Every single year you're going to put up 50% of your potential compensation on yourself. It's like, can you do this or can't you? If that's uncomfortable for you, then maybe look in a different direction.
Absolutely. Yeah, you have to be a tiny bit crazy at least, to maybe put it nicely. But
absolutely.
But with that said, and I think is that there's a tremendous amount of reward on the other side if you commit yourself, if you don't fall asleep at the wheel, and you continue to get better and know where you are maybe a little bit weaker. Is that sales offers a great opportunity to get a lot of reps.
Yes.
What a lot of reps at discovery calls to get better, at initial pitches, demos, proposal presentations. Is that there's a lot of opportunity to go back and look at the game tape. This is where I can get better. And I think for me, it's something that excites me, is because there is this very consistent feedback loop, right? Or even if that's just getting hung up on when you're making a cold call, or you don't get the best response to a cold email, like all of those things are data points for you to consume and be able to get better.
I love it. That mindset is the difference between mediocre and successful right there. Every day is an opportunity. You either win or you learn. That's it. Love it. Now, the way our program works is usually these athletes or veterans go through. We typically don't have an exclusive agreement, so usually they're interviewing in multiple places, and they usually end up with 2 or 3 offers. How would you coach somebody at like 23, 24 years old, fresh out of sports? How would you coach someone on selecting a place to start their career at? What should they care about?
Tom had asked me this a couple of weeks ago, and I feel like I didn't have the best answer, so I've really been thinking about it. And the first thing is, I think to really make sure that they understand that there's no wrong answer of big company, small company, medium-sized company, is that I think to put companies in boxes like that, you're probably going to get yourself in trouble. Is that, really understanding the team that you're on, their success, the way that they think about continuous improvement and learning is paramount. I think that is, for me, definitely number one. As I've continued in my sales career, something that I now look for, and is maybe even higher on the list than that, is what do the customers say about that company? What is their support like? What does ongoing optimization of the tool or the platform look like? Is that, as sellers, especially for, people ushering in maybe something new, right? Like a VM Turbo, is that there's a big leap of faith that, the best salespeople can help, customers overcome sometimes, is that there's no better, there's no easier way to sell than when you have, a horde of, successful and happy customers behind you. And those happy customers are indicative of the culture of that company. Are you customer driven, or are you just, trying to sell, right, at the expense of customers being successful? So that's something that I've learned to be, very, very important, when looking at a company. And then, the things as far as like rep attainment, right? What does attrition look like? And then, there are things like, like territory that people talk about. maybe don't prescribe to that quite as much. Of course, there's some signal to that, but that's an opportunity, right? If it's a territory that's not performing, we'll go make it perform. Type. I feel like I'm rambling. I'm sorry, but I feel some of the things that come to mind.
No, candidly, nobody's said that answer on the customer side, and I actually think that's really good advice, because that's a very good indicator of what type of organization you're joining. If you're going on their website and you don't see any testimonials, that's not a great sign.
I think to that, JR, that's actually one of the things that I took from my experience at HIG, is that one of the fundamental questions we'd always used to ask ourselves when looking at a company was, are they product driven, sales driven, or customer success driven? Now, that doesn't mean if you're one, you can't be others. Right. But that, if, sort of ranking those and looking at those critically was a very handy way to look at a company and their makeup.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, to your point, you can be all three. Mm-hmm. That comes down to like what you said about like team culture, like micro culture versus macro culture, like the company as a whole versus, like, you can have a great sales organization, a great product organization, and a great customer organization. Yeah. And ideally you want to hit all three, but I love the idea of like leading with that customer first. Yeah. Now, if you were going to publish, the Vince sales playbook, what are some of the principles that we'd find in that playbook?
And these aren't in any specific order, and maybe a little bit, tailored to myself. And I think one of the things at VM Turbo that was a challenge, just because I was so new to sales and that motion with those MSPs was new, was I didn't know how to be intentional with our prospects, like intentional of guiding them through the buying process, being intentional of helping them see around corners that they don't even know, to look around, to be a trusted advisor. I think of the ways now that my success that I've had, fortunately, is so tied to knowing the product extremely well, what the implementation motion looks like, where are the areas that implementations go wrong, so I can help customers get ahead of those things before they become a problem. Is that being intentional in everything that I do is very important. Now, I was describing it within the context of customers, but like, you have to be intentional of working with your SDRs, of developing, account plans and cadences, or intentional of, knowing what's, onboarding or your customer success engagements look like with customers post-sale, or intentional about going to Gong and listening to your recordings, and being uncomfortable of hearing yourself talk on those recordings, because those are the things you need to do to be better. So, definitely being intentional would be one chapter. For me personally, being patient would be number two. Is that, I think as early as salespeople, especially early on in your career, we're very reactionary, right? Yeah. A customer says something, we want to address it. That's typically what happens first. There's nothing wrong of taking a deep breath, or being patient as far as you get asked a product question of, hey, I don't know. Thanks for bearing with me while I go get you the right answer, that I can stand behind. And then the final one, JR, and I think the one most important, is being authentic, just being yourself. Is it okay if I plug a book, a sales book?
No, go ahead.
And these guys spoke at Service Titans SKO this past year. The book is called The Unsold Mindset by Colin Coggins and Garrett Brown. It's a wonderfully refreshing sales book. And where the book starts, and its, core tenet, throughout, is being authentic. And that, I could never be JR Butler as a salesperson. Is that I'm not JR, I'm Vince. What I can do, however, is, learn things from JR and from Chris Reisig and from, other leaders, and adapt that and mold it into who I am as a person and as a seller. And I think that it's been very, very important for for me to be myself and not someone that, maybe I'm not, particularly as a salesman.
Totally. It's our three core values as a company, and what we make our candidates commit to are accountability, coachability, and authenticity. I think authenticity is critical. And the reason I was laughing so hard was your second bucket of patience.
Yeah.
I was laughing about patience in the context of VM Turbo.
Yeah, right.
Because we all know what the patience was there.
No, it's and that's something with with any high growth, startup or environment like that, is that you're going all the time, is that to take your foot off the gas is so unnatural just because of the way that things progress, or maybe that company strategy pivots, is that it's very hard, and we're laughing about it because it is funny as hell, but it's important to remember that, it's okay to take a breath sometimes.
I'll never forget. I was living in Southie. I was like 2.5 years into working at Turbo, and I had to like let someone into my house to do some work. So I was driving into the office at 8:15, and I felt so behind on my day because it was 8:15. Which like now, like 40 years old, I'm looking back at that. I'm like, that is not normal, dude.
We were on the phones before 7. Cracking. I remember there was one time, and it was like 7:45, and I hadn't gotten into the office yet, and Ryson calls me. He's like, "Are you sick? Are you okay? Like, where are it's?" And I owe a lot to Chris. It's not a shot on Chris, but I remember that in particular. It's those environments, they bring something out of you for sure.
They do. So we always talk. I'm a big, and I think you probably remember this. Like, I'm a big like operating rhythm, operating cadence, and I think it's so critical. It's actually one of the core tenets of like when people ask us, why do you focus on athletes? Why do you focus on veterans? One of the things we talk about is like these guys and girls are used to structure, and sales has a little bit of a stigma, like, oh, you have all this autonomy. Like all it is like you got to hit your number at the end of the quarter. But you and I both know the people that are successful, it doesn't happen by accident, right? A broken clock is right twice a day, but isn't right consistently. And somebody with structure and operating rhythm is going to be right more than they're going to be wrong. Can you talk a little bit about how you structure your workday and your week?
Sure, absolutely. I think one thing that I've worked really hard to improve on over the past several years is blocking off time for certain things, certain points of the day, of how easy it is to maybe be distracted of, here, I'm going to answer a customer email, now this Slack internally, then make this call that I needed to make, of that, having, being like ping-ponged around, sort of like that, was like one of the quickest ways for me to get stressed, disorganized, forget things. So I think, first and foremost, and as for advice, is whether it's cold calling, right? Addressing or answering internal Slacks, right? Doing customer emails, listening to Gong calls, or whatever other recording, maybe platform you're using, is that to set certain times of the day for certain things. With that said, is that, maybe the thing that governs always is what I'm doing, either driving revenue or protecting revenue in some way. That if there's an issue with implementation that needs my attention because there's a churn risk, or is that that demands my attention, is that as sellers we have a revenue responsibility. So those are always going to guide me first and foremost.
I love it. It's so true, and it's going to be different in every sales job because the personas you're calling are different. The product you're selling is different. Like in some spaces, like 7 to 9, that's the best time to catch somebody. In other spaces, it's like, hey, you want to catch them in the afternoon. So like, it's not about having the same structure. It's about having a structure.
Yep.
And then I like that, protecting revenue. That's a good term. I've never heard that. I like that.
Yep.
Now, looking at like your career, you did the kind of shorter stints at like Oracle, Toast, VM Turbo, and then you landed at Service Titan, which is a great company. What clicked for you there that's led you to be there for almost 6 years, Vince? Like, what about Service Titan is driving that?
Yep. And so, JR, you had said just now of the way that athletes and veterans that they thrive under structure.
Yeah.
And I, still to this day, for me, school was easier, surprisingly, during the season than, in the spring.
I can relate
the
to that.
Being is like, okay, get done classes, go to practice. I have no choice but to then eat dinner and do my homework. There's no other time to do anything else.
Yeah.
Whereas in the spring, classes end. Now instead of a 3-hour practice, we have an hour and a half workout. So now I can play video games for a little while. And that just, structure is very, very important to me. Hand raised there for sure. And I think of, my roles at VM Turbo, where it was a newer team with maybe a less defined motion than, on, your team or even Kranowitz's enterprise team. At Toast, I was their first enterprise hire. So, really helping them break into that. So, still learning a lot, and doing a lot. But again, there wasn't, these are the steps to success. Oracle was, the other end of that spectrum of too much for me, especially at that point in my career. And I think that I found this perfect balance at Service Titan. I was employee, just north of 400 or so, but I walked into a corporate sales motion that was tried and true and, very well defined. And I found a lot of comfort, and success in that, fortunately. I think also another big thing was, the customer base is that, tradespeople are, very, very blue collar and no nonsense. And I had mentioned how my father's a coach, is that I'm very much like a no sir, yes ma'am type person. And that's, it seemed to align very, very well with the personas and the people that I'm, partnering with at Service Titan.
So the key words you said, everything you described, you said, for me.
Yep.
This is what makes me angry, is these broad statements that people make, like big companies are better,
Yep.
Smaller companies are better, public companies are better, venture. None of that is true. It's all about you as the individual. And it changes over time too, right? Like, you're going to get to a point in your career where you're going to want to go build something and create something from scratch.
Yep.
And that's going to happen. That these are normal cycles that we go through in our lives. And that's the key, right? It's really the Goldilocks approach. It's like this porridge is too hot. This porridge is too cold. This porridge is just right. And Service Titan right now for you is just right. And that's what it starts with kind of, you got to grow up a little bit and do some self-discovery and learn about what's right for you. But I'm so glad that you put it in that frame, because that's what people need to understand, is it's different for everybody, like anything else.
And I think, JR, one final thing of the grass isn't always greener, and I think to continue with the for me theme is understanding what parts of the grass are important for you for it to be green, right? Is that, Service Titan, as with any company, there's always opportunities to get better. And depending whether you spoke to me or somebody maybe in customer success or product or HR, is that their view on, how green certain things are would be different than mine. And, but it's finding, what parts of that lawn do I need to be green? And once you find that, which isn't any easy task within itself.
No.
So definitely don't want to frame it that way. But I've found that at Service Titan, and it's been very refreshing, because it's, this is the thing I'm supposed to be throwing myself at.
It's like anything else, right? Going to the wrong company is hard.
Yep.
Determining what makes a company the right company is hard. Choose your hard, right? Like you gotta kind of make that decision. And And I'm sure there's a lot of people that bounced around in 2021 when money was being thrown around for free that wish that they had kind of taken a step back and really thought, like, is a 30K jump on my OTE enough for me to make this move? And a lot of people regret that. So good advice. Hopefully, the problem is people have short memories, so I'm sure it'll happen again.
I think, and JR, if I could, I think that advice is particularly important for SDRs.
Yes.
That have spent a year, 18 months, 2 years of learning a product, understanding your customer base, their pain points. And I'm no exception. I know that I've felt this way of you get impatient or feel as if, hey, that should have been my AE job, or, this promise wasn't met, or things like that. There's always a breaking point, of course. You have to defend your, things like that. But always, just remember that you've invested a lot, in an expertise here, is that there is a lot more to gain of waiting 6 more months for that AE job than go learning a whole new customer base, a whole new product, and then try to go be an AE in that environment.
That's really timely advice, Vince, because there's a lot of companies that had to stall that promotion track because of the market. And there's a lot of impatient SDR, BDRs out there that are coming, to us even and saying, hey, I'm ready to be an AE. Like, what's out there? And I try to tell them that. So I'm probably going to clip that clip right there.
Please do. It's certainly important.
I love it.
Yep.
So Vince, awesome combo. These are the 2 final questions. We ask every guest these questions.
Yep.
If we asked you to highlight one of your skills that makes you elite in sales, what would your one skill be, you think?
Let's go to question 2 first.
Perfect. All right. At Shift Group, when someone's operating at the highest level, right? And one of the reasons we choose athletes and veterans is because I don't have to explain what this statement means. We say that they're dialed in, and they understand that. But everybody has a different view on what it means to be dialed in as a sales professional. What's it mean to you?
You can't fall asleep at the wheel. Is that one of our, sort of our core tenets and mottos for the sales team at Service Titan is entitled to nothing, grateful for everything. And I think that balancing, humility and hunger is very important. Is that, there are going to be times when things are going, very well, and you think that you have it figured out, and maybe you do to a certain degree, but it's, to continue to dig deep and, remember what got you there is that fire, right? To continue to succeed and don't lose that. Is that I don't think that you can be dialed in and, not have a hunger to get better, right? To continuously improve.
I love that. Entitled to nothing, grateful for everything.
Yep.
Dude, I might get that tattooed. That's freaking awesome. I love that. I love that.
Our CRO played rugby at Cal. Ross Beastman is a great, great leader. I'm very fortunate to have him leading our ship. But yeah, one of the things that he brought, to Service Titan when he came, and it's, it brings true, whether you're in sales or not. I feel like that's a great, motto to keep in the back of your head.
I love it. I love it. You want to come back to the skill that makes you elite, Vince? What do you got?
We all have our sales sort of quiver, right? And how many arrows do we have in it? And those arrows just represent times that we were told no or objections that we had to get past. Is that I have a really, really strong ability of remembering those things and being able to pull out the right arrow at the right time. And I think that's a product of being intentional about, listening to top performers' calls, right? Or, my own calls, or understanding the objections that, my colleagues and peers are facing day in and day out, is because, sales is just a series of objection handling, right? Is, well, what about this? Or no, because, right? Is so the more arrows that you have in your quiver, the better that you're going to be. And to take it back of, one of those core principles in the Vince, sales Bible is like I'm very intentional about continuing to put more arrows in that quiver.
I love that. That's great. Great analogy. Vince, this was an awesome conversation, man. Thank you so much for joining. # required listening for sure. Really appreciate your time, buddy.
No, likewise, JR. Thanks so much.
This wraps up this episode of Merchants of Change. If you enjoyed this episode, the most meaningful way to say thanks is to submit a review wherever you listen to podcasts. If you're interested in working with us, please come find us at www.shiftgroup.io.